I started investing in real estate to supplement our retirement for the cash flow process. I currently own 10 properties and an additional 10 with my husband, so 20 total.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode number 1470, 1470. That means today is a 10th episode show. And you know, in any area of life, communication is so vitally important, isn't it? In fact, I will tell you something that constantly amazes the man in the mirror, yours truly. Yes, that's me. Something that amazes me all the time. And this is it. You ready for this one? I am truly amazed that I could have such a great career for myself out of being able to communicate well, out of being able to explain things well. And I got to tell you, one of my inspirations for that was the person we're going to learn from today. And that is Ronald Reagan. What? Jason, you don't have Ronald Reagan on your show? That's impossible. He passed away. Oh, yeah, minor detail. Anyway, the late, great Ronald Reagan. No, we're going to talk to the author of a book who dives into and dissects his speaking style, but not only Reagan, other great speakers like Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy. You know, there have been so many over the years. But so we'll get into that in a moment. That's our guest today because it's a 10th episode show where we talk about something that will just help you be more successful in life. But again, I got to say, a big part of my career and a career that has been a good ride, you know, I could really attribute that to being able to explain things well and to be able to communicate well. I hope you agree. People tell me that all the time, that's one of my little superpowers. Hey, I have a lot of weaknesses, okay, but that's not one of them. I'm a good communicator. That's what people tell me, at least. And so I hope you feel the same way, and that's why you're listening. So thank you for listening. Okay, now that I got to see if I can get out of this room and fit my head through the door. Okay, before we get to our 10th episode guest, let's talk about a little real estate and financial stuff. So I saw this chart among the real estate spam that comes to my inbox. By the way, remember a few months ago, you sent a lot of your spam to us. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. We are happy to get your real estate spam and look it over and see who's spamming out there. It's great. So thank you for sharing that. If you were listening several months ago, we sort of had the spam challenge and people were emailing me all of their real estate spam. It was quite interesting to look at it. And, there's a lot of sleazy operators in this industry. There's a lot of copycats in this industry, and you got to be careful out there. You got to be careful for sure. But interest rates. This was interesting, and this is obviously very generic, this little chart that I'm looking at that I received as part of my real estate spam. And I don't know what they did because they never said, if they averaged the interest rate over the course of these different decades that I'm about to share with you and about to quote with you or quote to you. I don't know if they took the interest rate in the middle of the decade, maybe on the 5th year. I'm not sure. But the point is still the same. And, with some things in life, you really do need to be precise. You need to be exact, and you need to be specific. With other things in life, it doesn't really matter. If you're a little loose with the numbers, if your numbers aren't perfect, it's kind of irrelevant. Now, don't quote me on that. And here's what I mean. Look, if you're launching a spaceship, if you're a pilot, if you're building a bridge and you're an engineer or a software program, you got to be exact. But when you're discussing macroeconomics, the point is to convey the idea of the macro, the trend, the mega trend even. And I think this does convey it, even though it's, not going to be accurate because I don't know exactly how they came up with the numbers. But the point is true. The point is true. Interest rates over the decades, right? In the 70s, 8.86%. Of course, these are owner-occupied rates, I'm sure, although they don't bother to say that because this is woefully unspecific. In the 80s, 12.7%. Now, back in the 70s, 8.86%. I think I said that. In the 80s, 12.7%. In the 90s, 8.12%. In the 2000s, 6.29%. That's where I started being very wrong about my interest rate predictions, by the way. And in the 2010s, 4.07%. And today, 3.24%. So obviously, interest rates are at all-time lows. And this is where so many fools get it completely wrong. Because they say things like, well, look at housing prices. Housing prices are higher than they were in 2006 before the market crashed. Or they're the same as they were. It's a bubble. Bubble. No. Okay. Come on, silly person. You don't get it. You're looking at the small picture. Tell them that. Tell them that, folks. I want you. The next time someone says this to me, tell them. Tell them. Wake them up. Hit them upside the head. Well, don't do that because you might get a lawsuit or end up in jail. So don't hit them upside the head. Just throw a Nerf ball at them, okay? To wake these fools up. They don't get it. That barely matters. Who cares about the price when people buy things on a payment? Now, not everybody buys on a payment. Some people buy on the price. So I get it. The price still matters. But it doesn't matter that much, okay? It doesn't matter that much. So housing costs, when you finance the house, have actually gone down. They are not at all-time highs. They are lower than those prior peaks by a pretty significant margin. And then, of course, you have to divide up in the three market types: linear, cyclical, hybrid, like I've taught you so many times over the years. So just keep that all in mind. Keep that all in mind. And hey, I got to tell you, the news has flipped. I mean, literally in 2 days, in the past 2 days, all of the articles are just changing. As the quarantines start to end, things open up. Wow. Let me read you a couple quick titles here, okay? More good news for May. Newly pending home sales up almost 50%. 50% from the same period in April, all right? Is another title. Is the housing market already rebounding from COVID-19? And by the way, when you read the article, the answer is yes, it is. It seems to be. Another title. New home sales rise as Americans freed from lockdowns go house hunting. Wow. This is just, I mean, it has already just flipped. They flipped the script. They flipped the script already. And, again, it's a very short-term thing, but wow. Another one, as I predicted over 2 months ago. Young people are rushing to leave big cities in favor of less infected suburbia. Where did you hear that one first, dear listeners? You heard it from me first, before anyone was saying that. So that article is yesterday, and I was saying it 2.5 months ago. In the area of pandemic, it's dog years. It's, a month is like 3 years. Okay, so it's pretty amazing, folks. It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing what's going on. Okay, I got a listener question here, and I really, sometimes we fall behind on this stuff, folks. We apologize. There's just too much to cover. Too much to cover. We can't do it all. Listen, if I had my way, I would be talking to you guys for 2 or 3 hours a day. I love it. I love talking to you. Okay? It's wonderful. It's very cathartic for me. If you can't tell, this is like my psychological therapy because I get to vent. I get to rant. And by the way, we got a new show coming up for you. I had Harry Dent back on again, just like last week. Wow, he was on a rant. Man, that guy was ranting. Woo! Harry, drink a little less coffee, okay? Chill out, man. Anyway, no, he was good. It was a rant. It was pretty good. So we'll have that coming up. Okay, so here is a listener question from Robert Rascon. Robert says, Jason, I've been a listener for many years, and I'm finally in the position to buy properties within the next 6 months. I love the podcast, but have trouble finding episodes where you go in depth on many of your basic principles and philosophies. Any chance you can write or get ghostwritten a book as a reference for people like me to keep handy? Keep up the great work. Okay, so Robert, first off, thank you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the kind words. Yes, you can go to jasonhartman.com/quickstart, or you can just type that in, not .com, but just type in Jason Hartman Quick Start on any podcast platform and listen to our Quick Start podcast. That has some of the more core episodes, and thank you to Gary and Sue for sort of hand-picking some of those and kind of outlining them for the people that want to get the basics. I know we've got almost 1,500 episodes, and you've only got 10 hours in the day to listen to me, so you got to get some. We got to distill it right for you. So that's what we've tried to do on the Quick Start podcast. But again, it's not entirely possible to do that. So we try, and the Quick Start podcast is a good resource for that to get some of the basics. And that's also why we do Flashback Friday, because those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And Flashback Friday is good. Okay, so another comment. Amina says, Jason she was writing to one of our investment counselors, Carrie, so this is not in a direct person here, but Jason should do a YouTube presentation. By the way, have you subscribed to our YouTube channel? It's really growing, and thank you for all those of you who do subscribe and engage and write comments. And you press the like button a lot and the notification button so you won't miss any videos. We're really trying to do our best to build our YouTube thing a little bit. We've neglected that. I'll be the first to admit it's we have not been good at video. I've got a face for radio, so that's why we don't do enough on YouTube. But we need to do more, and we're doing more video now that we're having all these virtual meetings. Boy, by the way, I was on with Ken McElroy for almost 2 hours today, going over my pandemic investing presentation, and he loved it, man. He just loved it. Said I really recognized a lot of trends that other people haven't thought of. And so that will be the kickoff. Well, not the kickoff, because we're going to kick off with kind of a happy hour, but it'll be the sort of general session kickoff to our upcoming virtual Meet the Masters event. Date and registration to be announced very soon. We can't wait to see you all there. And all of you from around the world who've been complaining that we don't have enough virtual stuff for you, because many of you have flown out to see us from across the planet, and we very much appreciate that. Thank you. But hey, this will be easy for you to attend. Now, hey, there is a time zone issue, and there's no way you can satisfy people with a 24-hour global clock, of course. But, heck, you can get up at 3 a.m. or stay up all night and, make it kind of fun and be on with us live, or, we'll offer a replay option for you, I'm sure, too. We haven't quite figured that out yet. But anyway, so Amina, one of our investors, says, do a YouTube presentation on calculating ROI, return on investment, for a portfolio loan to buy multiple properties at once. The calculations are a bit more tedious. Oh, Amina, that's a tough one. I can't really answer that very easily. I'd really sort of have to have you do that with me, where we could go back and forth. Maybe we do like an interactive session at Meet the Masters on that. That's the great thing about doing this virtually. We can do screen share. We can fire up Property Tracker at the same time. And, do some performas and do some really interactive stuff. So maybe we can do that at our upcoming virtual Meet the Masters. But I can't answer that question without knowing a lot more details. I mean, look, basically I'd look at it this way. If you get a portfolio loan and say that is a blanket loan that covers 10 properties, for example, well, what's the difference? I mean, you would just do the pro forma for each of your 10 properties inside of Property Tracker, and you would put the loan terms in each pro forma, and then you would have each pro forma's, each property's rent and each property's cost and cash down and all of that stuff. I don't know if I'm understanding your question or understanding why that would be complicated. Well, I mean, it's more tedious because, there are more properties. Maybe you're doing a portfolio of 10 properties at a time. And by the way, thank you for buying 10 from us. We love you. Yeah, we appreciate the business. Yeah. Have I ever kissed on the show before? I don't think I've done that. Maybe I did that with the dog. I went like that. But yeah, anyway, lovey, kissy, kissy. So yeah, I don't know. I hope I kind of addressed your question there, but maybe I didn't. So feel free to engage again. Ask Carrie, your investment counselor, and she'll bring it to me, or we can get you on the show or do virtual Meet the Masters. Maybe do that live and see what we come up with. Okay, that's one of the things I really love, and that's what one of the things we're really trying to figure out for this virtual Meet the Masters. And I'm kind of trying to figure out if we can do a blend where we do part of it as a sort of a workshop, where it's the typical Zoom meeting that I'm sure every single one of you has participated in now, where, we see everybody's little square on the screen and everybody can just speak up. But then sometimes you want to do presentation mode, where it's, where you just speak like the speakers or the panelists speak, and then everybody listens, and then they can ask questions in the chat. So we're trying to figure out like a nice blend of that for you, because I tell you, I really love the interactive type of format. That's my favorite. When I'm doing live events, I like it when people shout out questions and, try to stump me and stuff like that. It really, it really makes the thinking better, I think. So anyway, more to come on that. Without further ado, we better get to our guest. If you need us, reach out, jasonhartman.com or 1-800-HARTMAN, and let's go to our guest and let's learn how to present, how to speak, how to communicate from the truly great communicators of ages past. Here we go. It's my pleasure to welcome James Rosebush. He was Deputy Assistant to President Ronald Reagan and Chief of Staff to the First Lady Nancy Reagan and Senior Advisor at the White House. His first book, First Lady, Public Wife, was lauded as the first book that assessed the non-elected job of the First Lady. He is founder and CEO of Growth Strategy, a company focused on management strategies, finance, wealth management, marketing, etc. He's pioneered a holistic approach to organizational consulting, and he's had clients like J.P. Morgan, Mercedes-Benz, Tudor Investments, Bankers Trust, and many others. He's the best-selling author of True Reagan, What Made Ronald Reagan Great and Why It Matters, and the new best-selling book, Winning Your Audience, Deliver a Message with Confidence, with the confidence of a president. Well, hey, James, welcome. I certainly want to learn how to be as good a communicator as Ronald Reagan. And by the way, this is not political. It's just he was a good communicator. And, he crossed the aisle really well. Tip O'Neill was his good friend. He even gave a eulogy at his funeral, I remember. Reagan really, through his humor and his speaking style, was able to bridge a lot of gaps politically, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, Jason. Great to be with you, by the way. And you're a great communicator. And I think you may share Reagan's secret in being called the great communicator. And that was because he loved his audience. He had respect for the American people. Wherever he went in the world, he believed that if he could only reach his audience unfettered and unfiltered by the media, he could convince them of anything. He was an evangelist for freedom. Wherever he went in the world, it was his message that inspired him, and it was his message that inspired his audience. And these are the things to remember about Reagan and why it was that he was able to achieve this status. And it was that he didn't have an ego in the fight. It's very unusual, Jason. I mean, most of us care about what our listeners think about us. Are they falling asleep? Are they playing with their phone? All these things are scary to us. 75% of all people are deathly afraid of public speaking. Reagan didn't have an ego in the fight. He didn't care if you liked him or not. And the great thing about that was that it allowed him to be free of fear.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. So maybe that's the first tip then. Talk to us a little bit about, and there are a bunch of things, so I may be, going out of order here a little bit, but one of the things that I think really typified Reagan so well is his humor. His, I'm not like that. I wish I could be like that. I'm just not funny. But, Reagan was great at like diffusing situations. I'll share two examples. His, there you go again, that was so, it was just cute how he would do that. He would have his opponent tearing into him and, with insults that most people would have come back and said, and it would have been like this fight, right? And Reagan just said, there you go again, like this is the normal thing we'd expect from you. And it just put people in their place and the audience loved it. Any thoughts on that one?
Yes. And, Jason, that was at the debate with Jimmy Carter in Cleveland. And that was the first time I had the honor of meeting the Reagans. And these comments that you're referring to were extemporaneous on his part. One time we were at the Congress in Lisbon in Portugal, and they decided in protest to Reagan speaking there to release thousands of white doves to fly all around this massive gilded hall. And Reagan, looking up, said, "Oh, you want peace? That's what we want as well." Mm-hmm. So it disarmed the people in the hall and the media by thinking they were going to make a big stroke and to oppose Reagan and to characterize him as a warmonger, which of course he was not. Mm-hmm. And he turned it around through, again, not being piqued or irritated or angry, but by being so secure himself that he was able to turn it around on a dime and make it work for him. And it's a unique, I have to say, how many of us can really do that? Yeah, right. When someone is confronting us or, but wherever we went, Reagan had to confront protesters. Many times one time we had a group that had a license to throw bottles of blood on us. I mean, everywhere we went, all day long across from the White House in Lafayette Park, there were protesters. We don't even have this today. So people forget because history, unfortunately, is a thin veil today to people. But we had these kinds of protests as well. But Reagan didn't barb them. And he told us never to be anything but a well, not a fount, which is something I often share with the people that I coach, not to be a fount and to talk too much, but to be a well of information to people that are looking for it. And that was one of the ways he was able to use humor to disarm. He also, because he was a person who was conflict averse, he developed storytelling and humor to deflect interest on him personally. He was the son of an alcoholic. So he didn't want anyone to probe too much into his character. Interesting. Another example of Reagan's, and this isn't necessarily humor, although it turned out to be really humorous, but his ability to reframe things was amazing. And I guess part of that is what you started off with saying he sort of didn't have an ego about it because, the ego says, and, ego is not all bad. I think the ego serves a lot of great purposes. Without ego, probably be no progress, but it's something that needs to be managed, obviously. And Reagan would like reframe something and kind of, like you say, let it slide off his back, like the dove example and so forth. But, one of the ones that everybody remembers is Reagan Mondale, when the issue of his age came up. And then he completely flips that whole thing. And he says, I will not make my youth, my opponent's youth and inexperience an issue in this campaign. Oh my
God, that was brilliant. How do you think on your feet like that? That was
I know.
Incredible.
Absolutely unbelievable. Yeah. No, he was, he said he marveled, and because he was belittled by people because he was a screen actor, as if an actor could not become president of the United States.
Right.
And he said, I'm amazed that anyone could become president if they hadn't been trained as an actor. So Reagan found his footing as a public speaker when he was a sophomore in college, Eureka College, rural college where I've spoken actually on the stage where Reagan did when he was 20 years old. And he, believe it or not, was a part of a protest group to fire the president of his college because they didn't like his policies. And here he was, he was speaking to a rally, and he says, for the first time in my life, I learned the power of oratory to bring people to action. And later in his life, he refers to the very first oration as his most important speech that he ever gave in his life, which goes beyond the Berlin Wall speech. It goes on beyond what he gave, I think, is one of his most inspired speech after the Challenger astronaut tragedy.
That was a really good one, too. Yeah.
That was a really good one. But here he says, and he defines great speech making by saying he uses the power of words and the way he expressed them to bring people to action.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. Okay, well, take us through kind of the nuts and bolts. I mean, look, everybody listening, even if they didn't like the politics, they probably, at least if they're being even somewhat objective, they have to agree that Reagan was really, really good. And he had this ability to get people to like him, even if they disagreed with him. And he could cross the aisles extremely well and get things done. How does somebody listening apply what Reagan did in their own life? I mean, everybody listening has to get up in front of an audience once in a while. Nowadays, maybe not in front of a live audience, but online in a virtual audience. And, we all can benefit by being better communicators. What are the nuts and bolts of this? How do we decode the Reagan skill and apply it to our own lives?
Well, that's an excellent question. And the first thing to do is to buy my book, because as an Amazon #1 bestseller, it's a handbook and a guide that will teach you. It's been called the new Bible of public speaking, and that everyone should have it on their desk. So I was brought up by a dad who taught public speaking. He was a Dale Carnegie instructor. So every day, basically, my speech was being judged by my dad. And so after learning from him and starting to speak probably when I was in junior high school and continuing on through my days of being a scholar of the Rotary International Scholar, going to the Soviet Union, being followed by spies and that sort of thing. I had to come back and speak about it. I knew I had to become a storyteller. So then when I worked for Ronald Reagan in the White House, I see this other extraordinary speaker. So I had to convey this in a book so everyone could learn these things. So how do we answer this question? That is, the first thing is you have to become imbued with a message. I talked to Lady Thatcher about this, the Iron Lady, who was the long-serving Prime Minister of Great Britain. And she said she's afraid every time she got up on the platform. And I said, you're kidding. She said, because I said, it doesn't come across. She said, I do two things, Jim. The first thing, I talk to myself and I say, okay, old gal, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. She says, I repeat that mantra a dozen times. Then, she says, I throw my weight into the issues I'm talking about, and within a split second, I've lost myself. So this is critically important. Getting over that, defeating the fear, being imbued with the message. And the next point is to love your audience. I remember one time in the South Lawn of the White House, Mary Martin, the famous screen and theater actress, I said to her, why do your audiences love you so much? And she threw her arms around me, which was nice. And she said, Jim, I was born in Texas. And she said, I was brought up loving people, and they love me back. And this is precisely Reagan's, one of his secrets. He loved the American people, and they felt that. I went into a bar with him one time in Dorchester, Massachusetts, right in the smack in the middle of enemy territory, so to speak. Everyone came around him. They loved talking to him. They loved spending time with him. You know why? He didn't judge them. These were, working class people. I'm sure they were all voted for the Democrat. candidate, and they loved Ronald Reagan. Why? Because he loved them. He wasn't a person of judgment. He didn't condemn the American people. He didn't say we're in a malaise. He didn't say
it was the complete opposite of Jimmy Carter.
I
mean, Jimmy Carter was like the complete opposite. It was interesting. So the pendulum tends to swing in the political world, right? We move from liberal to conservative and back again. That's just sort of the nature of history, if you will. So I'd say a couple things to what you were saying. When it was Margaret Thatcher and Reagan, you reminded me when you were speaking about it of a famous quote, maybe people have heard. I really like it. And I don't remember who said it, but it's, let he who wants to move and convince others be first moved and convinced himself. So it's got to be a message that you really believe in, that you've internalized, that's, you feel like you're on a mission to bring it to the world, right? Rather than something that's sort of like an academic project where, you're giving an oral report like in school, right? That's a lot different than something you really believe in, like Thatcher or Reagan, right? And then secondly, just the idea of focusing outside of oneself rather than focusing internally. You get up in front of an audience and of course you're nervous, that's normal. But that means you're focusing on you rather than focusing on them, right? So maybe those two things are helpful mindsets.
Well, they are. Thank you for that quote. I think that's excellent. And just to illustrate that, two things. So Reagan goes in 1985, he goes to speak to the Religious Broadcasters Conference in Orlando, and he calls the Soviet Union an evil empire. Now, the media went absolutely nuts, even though previous presidents had said the same thing. Why was it that they went so crazy?
Well, because the media supports communism. What else?
Well, yes, they do. Yes, they do. But there's another aspect of that. And that supports just the quote that you just shared with us. And that is, Reagan believed that the Soviet Union was an evil empire. He believed it. And because he believed it, it came across as more powerful. And that is why they resisted it so much. Trump is resisted so much because he's successful. Now, let's talk just another quick example. When Reagan goes to the Brandenburg Gate, he's already met with Gorbachev. He knows he's established a relationship of some degree of trust with him. So he goes to the Brandenburg Gate, and this is how he says it. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Emphasis on where he wants the wall to go. He knows, and he's so confident that that wall needs to come down to provide the reunification of Germany and the freedom of all its citizens to worship God. He believed that so much, and he wanted it to happen, and he visualized it. Now, this is another thing. When you're speaking, visualize what you want. That will give brilliance and glistening to your speech. So here's Reagan. He's already talking about walls for about 10 minutes. So he uses the emphasis and the cadence to say now, when he talks about this wall, he tells Gorbachev where he wants it. And where is it? He wants it down. And guess what happened? It came down.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. Yeah, I got to tell you something about that. I've been to Berlin 3 times. And the second time I was there, I remember we went on this tour with this clearly very left-wing guide who was a young guy. He was a student, and he took us around we had a, small tour. And he kept talking about when Kennedy visited Berlin and said, I too am a Berliner, right, in his speech. And he completely neglected to tell anybody about Reagan, who is actually the guy that got the wall torn down. It was unbelievable to me that he could just leave that out, that minor detail. It's totally incredible. But yes, Reagan did achieve that, and he achieved the fall of communism. Now, Bush #1, or the elder Bush, I should say, he presided over it and over that transition, but it was Reagan that made it all possible.
Oh, yes. Make no mistake about that.
Absolutely. Okay, so the wall comment and visualizing what you want to happen in advance, right? Is that the point of that? What you were
saying?
Yeah,
that's a part of storytelling. Okay. So this is most of communication. We have to be clear about this, is nonverbal. It is from consciousness to consciousness. This is very important to understand. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal today about John Paul II, Pope John Paul II, commonly called JP2. And I had the extraordinary honor of being blessed by John Paul II 3 times. Now, I'm going to tell you that this person described this in this article today in the Wall Street Journal, and I had the same experience. Pope John Paul II took my hands. This is 3 times, twice in the Vatican and 1 time on an airstrip where his plane and the president's plane was landing at the same time, and we had a brief bilateral meeting right on the tarmac. He was a person, he could take your hands and bless you and look into your eyes, and with barely speaking a word, he communicated the power and the light and the presence and the beauty of holiness. This is how you communicate more powerfully than even using words, consciousness to consciousness. Now, 65% of all communication is nonverbal. What does that mean for the speaker? That means, first of all, that you have to understand that. Secondly, it helps you bring down the fourth wall of partition between you and your audience. And it puts the onus on you to learn and understand your own authenticity, who you are, to know yourself. Self-knowledge is the beginning of all progress and developing the capability in you to communicate to, it could be a group of 5 people, it could be a group of 1 million. Knowing yourself, knowing what you believe, and having an appreciation for your audience is how you convey yourself and your message non-verbally. Now, what happens, the audience will get settled in and they will make a decision already before a word comes out of your mouth. It's the way you carry yourself, the way you dress, and your unspoken message, which is heard in the audience even before you open your mouth.
Okay, so what do we do about that? What are the specifics? I mean, Reagan had this sort of, he was tall. I mean, he was good looking. Like how does everybody apply that? How do they carry themselves, or what body language tips can you share?
Well, confidence in your message really transforms any kind of physicality. But I will say this, that having respect for your audience, dressing in your favorite clothes so you're not thinking about it, having your hair cut, caring about how your appearance will convey and what it will convey to your audience.
And clearly in today's world, we are in trouble in most of those categories. So sadly.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, I don't want people speaking to me in their sweatpants, right? Yeah. But I mean, we can, I guess we have to tolerate that on Zoom calls. But it all goes into how you feel about yourself and your message. If you feel that you have an important message and that's in your heart, one time when I was with Nancy Reagan, we went to a drug abuse center where there were thousands of kids that were learning whether they completed their rehab program and would be going home or not. And we sat through 3 or 4 hours of learning whether these kids are going to be reunited with their parents. And I'm telling you, Jason, the Secret Service was crying. We were crying. Even the White House press corps, they were crying, which is unheard of. And so Nancy Reagan had these prepared remarks, of course, and I was sitting next to her, and we looked at each other, and we were like, no, this will not do. She can't stand up there and make prepared remarks. So at the end of the program, again, this massive gymnasium, and she takes the mic, and first she turns to the parents, and she tells them how much she loves them, how much she understands that the hurt of a child in a parent's heart is something that's almost impossible to bear. And she talks like this. And then she turns to the kids and she tells them, I love you. I support you. I want to help you. You've got a great life ahead of you, and so forth. Well, again, I mean, everyone was just sobbing. She sat down, and on the way back to the hotel that night, in the back of the limo, we both had we were just exhausted, wiped out. And I said to her, I think this reminds me of a little saying I've always liked, and that is, when the heart speaks, however simple the words, they're always accepted by those who have hearts. So if you even have a simple, unsophisticated message, If you want to inspire an audience, or you want to help an audience, or you want to relate to the people in your audience, and you speak from your heart to their heart, you will win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good point. Okay. Any other things to kind of wrap this up?
Well, I'll tell you sort of a cute story. So I coach a lot of CEOs, salespeople, that sort of thing. And one time I had a guy who he spoke with a very high voice, and he was a mature gentleman, and he was embarrassed by his voice. And I said, you can change your voice. No, I cannot change my voice. This is the way I was born. I have it. There's nothing I can do about it. That's not true, I said. And I took a basketball, which I have in the room where I was coaching, and I said, I asked his permission, of course, and then I pushed it in his gut. And I said, I want you to feel the hot air coming up from your stomach, warming your vocal cords. Then I want you to spend the next month listening to baritone singers on your radio or YouTube, and I want you to mimic those. And he was able to lower by an octave the sound of his voice. Now, the deeper sounding voice is better heard by the listening ear and taken more seriously. That man was able to impact his audience and reach his goals easier because he was willing to change the tone of his voice.
Absolutely. And, I heard a speaker talk about that a couple of weeks ago on a Zoom presentation. And he said some people feel, and he was a voice coach, some people feel that changing their voice is fake. And he likened it to a piano. And he says, look, a piano has, I think he said 88 keys. I don't really know. But He said, and each key sounds different, but it's still a piano. The piano's not faking it. It just uses different keys for different occasions, right? And
right.
and so that's very true. Yes, you can do that and have command of that. The other thing maybe you could speak to before you go is that Reagan, you talked about how he would almost impart like a visualization of the path forward in his speeches. The Berlin Wall was the example there, but he also was very good at taking complex issues and making them simple. I remember the time when he was stacking up dollar bills on a podium and using that to illustrate, saying, well, this is the size of, I think, the national debt, and it would go to the moon if you stacked these $1 bills or something like that. Now it'd be to Pluto. I think that was what he was talking about. But he would help people really understand things with analogy and metaphor and all kinds of tools, right? Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah. So I always tell people they need to be a Sherpa. We don't have many people who are speakers who know what that means. A Sherpa is a guide that gets you on the ascent up to the top of a mountain with, surviving. So I think we need more speakers that are Sherpas. But I'll give you another example. I mean, one is like you speak of. When we were out at the Reagan Ranch, we took a pallets of documents that were required for, let's say, one drug submission or something like that. And of course, he just loved things like that. That was a visual image. But the most important one, remember this, Jason, he ever did, was the night he gave his going away goodbye speech from the Oval Office when he was leaving. I think the next day they were leaving the White House. And he says this: I've often spoken of that shining city on a hill, but I don't think I've ever described what I meant when I saw it. Right. So he pulls you in, right? Mm-hmm. He's telling you he has this vision of a shining city on a hill. Now he's concluding his 8 years as the leader of the greatest nation in the history of the world, and he's explaining that if the light of American exceptionalism ever grows dim, the rest of the world will fall into chaos. This is how he describes the shining city on a hill. So the listener, of course, is thinking about light, and they're thinking about this, what this shining city on a hill is, because he describes Governor Bradford's quotation and why he described his landing in America with this great potential and this great hope of what this land could become. Reagan was a person who was imbued with this kind of picturesque, just like Lincoln. Lincoln, he was raised on only 2 books, the collected works of Shakespeare and the Bible. Reagan was similarly raised by an itinerant minister mother and was told he had to memorize the Bible several times. So he used the alliteration and the color and the teachings of the Bible to really pattern the way he taught. And he greatly respected parable teaching. So Reagan loved to instruct through parables. And that's one of the reasons that his speeches are memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good stuff. This is such an important skill set. It really is possibly the most important skill set because the communication isn't always from a podium. Sometimes it's just interpersonal, and a lot of the same ideas translate to an interpersonal platform as well. Good stuff. James, give out your website. The book's available in all the usual places. I just downloaded the audio version. I can't wait to listen. But give out your website.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great to be with you. You can find out more about this book and about my coaching on impactspeakercoach.com, www.impactspeakercoach.com. And the name of the book is Winning Your Audience. You can find it anywhere. Get it on Amazon, Audible, or hardback. And I think you'll enjoy it.
Good stuff. James Rosebush, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.